Hello, and welcome back to the Irish Tennis Updates podcast. My name is Adam, your host. This week I am talking to David Wilson. David is an expert in education and in learning, and he's applied this widely to the area of tennis coaching. On this, he has presented at various ITF and Tennis Europe coaching conferences on subjects such as how we learn tennis and how best to coach tennis. During this chat, we talk a lot about coach education and the coach education system in Ireland, and how David sees ways that this could be improved and how this could be improved in order to produce more players and have more success within Ireland. We also touch on other issues within Irish tennis, for example, tournaments and how tournaments could become more meaningful, and also how we could do a better job of selling our sport. I really enjoyed talking to David, and I think there's a lot to take from this episode, a lot of interesting stuff that we touch on. So I hope that you enjoy this episode, and with that, I will pass you over to David Wilson.
All right, David, firstly, thanks very much for joining me today. Just want to start asking if you could pick a superpower, what superpower would you pick and why?
Oh my God, great start. Well, given that it's tennis related, I suppose my superpower would be not to have a injured back, which I've had for 6 or 7 years. So it's not much of a superpower, but it has stopped me playing tennis, unfortunately. So I haven't been able to play for about 7 years now, and like 100% fine walking around doing everything else, but unfortunately it was a tennis injury. So any attempts to go back to play to any reasonable standards just brings me back to a banjack state. So not a fantastic superpower, but if I could fix that, I would be delighted.
Well, it'd be as good a superpower as any if you could get back to tennis.
Yeah.
Now I know kind of yourself in the coaching world mainly, but obviously, as you said, you do play. So just how did that tennis journey start for you?
Yeah, so I suppose I can give you the quick 2-minute summary, because I'm sure nobody wants to hear my life story now. But the quick 2-minute summary was that I played all junior tournaments, like so many of the other people that you have spoken to, and got from that into coaching, because when I was in college, it was just a sensible thing to do because it basically paid more than working in a restaurant like my other friends. So got into coaching, found that I really loved it. Subsequently got into being a school teacher, so coaching was something that I was able to keep doing then at the same time. So went up through all the coaching courses in Tennis Ireland, up through all the different levels. So I was getting more and more involved in coaching as I was then starting the career as teaching. And then a third angle kind of came into it, which was I was doing lots of study myself in Trinity College. I was doing loads of postgraduate stuff, and that was all in the field of learning, basically education. So by the time I finished all of that, I had kind of got to the kind of higher levels of the coaching structure, and at the same time was finishing kind of lots of research in education and learning. So I ended up putting those two things together, and was essentially invited to various coaches conferences and events, because I was able to speak with a bit of tennis background, with a bit of education background. So I was making presentations about things like how best to organize coaching lessons, or how to structure a coaching program, or how we can help people learn what is a pretty difficult sport. So all these kind of things. So I was able to just put a few bits together that I had done, and it landed me in this position where every so often now I get to go to these events and help people out. So it's a nice combination of stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, no, really good. Well, could you give kind of an example of two of the kind of things that you would have presented at those conferences that I guess would have connected your interests of education and of
well, I suppose one of the big ones at the moment that's kind of pretty topical is there's a big drive at the moment around the world in terms of coaching to move away from this idea of just directing people in any sport. But let's obviously relate this to tennis. So you think of your classic tennis lesson, and this is now whether we're talking a beginner or Roger Federer, but the classic lesson 20, 30 years ago would have been the coach as the expert telling the player lots of stuff. Now, over years and years and years of research, what's been pretty clearly shown is that when you fill a player's head with information and you just tell them loads of things, it's not really very efficient, because ultimately when the pressure's on in a match situation, and we've all had this experience where you get a bit nervous, your brain starts racing and everything just starts falling apart, because your brain is trying to like kind of cling on to bits of information about what you should be doing in that situation. So the move over the last certainly 7-8 years has been towards coaching as a more kind of experimental discovery idea. So what you'd be doing is you'd be saying to a player, right, we need to work on your approach to the net during a rally situation. And you would practice those situations, and you would help the player identify what areas they're weak on, hope that they can try, with your help, obviously, identify a few possible solutions, train those solutions. So what you're trying to do is automate the learning process so that the player learns by discovery. So if you think, the analogy would be when we all learn to drive a car, that if we actually sat down and went through the 40 or 50 things that you have to do and try to memorize those, you'd just be paralyzed when you get to a traffic light. You just wouldn't literally be able to know what to do when the pressure's on. So you're trying to get people to just learn through experience. So I know that's, sorry, a bit of a waffly explanation, but yeah, at things like coaches conferences, that was one of the things. I think that was in Estonia at the Tennis Europe conference. I think I presented that. And that's, it's brilliant to do things like that, because you're presenting the information, but you have an audience in front of you, of a couple of hundred best coaches in Europe as it was then. And then of course you've the coffee break, lunch, going out in the evening, and you're getting all of the feedback from them and learning more yourself. So yeah, there's lots of stuff like that, which is great.
Yeah, no, I wanted to kind of ask you that about being at those events and those experiences, and as well as obviously presenting of what kind of stuff you would learn yourself. Like how much of a learning experience were those conferences for you as well?
Yeah, well, it's actually a really interesting question, because when I've been saying, just using that example I went through there, that the whole model of like teaching and learning now is trying to move away from just the person at the front telling you what to do. And I mean, even anybody who's in school at the moment will know this, the whole rejig of the new junior cert, where it's all about doing projects yourself and working in teams. So the irony of these big conferences is that lots of them are still run in a way where there is one person standing up the front just talking to the audience. So even though the governing bodies and all the coaching associations are trying to encourage coaches to coach in a different way, in a more efficient way, they still themselves tend to teach coaches in an old-fashioned way. So when you turn up as an attendee at one of these events, I find personally the biggest benefit you get is actually not when you're sitting there listening to people. I find it's when you're turning to talk to the person beside you and say, what did you think of that? Or what do you do where you're from? Or it's the coffee breaks, the lunch, the evenings, sitting around in the hotel. I mean, that's when I get a huge amount out of it. And not so much just what you get out of it, but you meet just incredibly interesting people. And I'd often say, in some ways, you go to those events and you could be talking to people who are coaching some of the best players in the world, and you actually realize, you know what, we know an awful lot of stuff in Ireland. Like, we're actually better than we give ourselves credit for a lot of the time. That you can be talking to somebody who, like I say, coaches a great player, and you're thinking, this lad is a complete bluffer. Like he's and you come back home and you're talking to people who know lots more. So there's lots to be learned, but also lots to give you encouragement, because I think sometimes all of us are kind of passionate about Irish tennis, and we all have our own little different niches and areas that we're interested in, but it's very easy to be negative. And I know sometimes we all end up on that horse of kind of, oh, Tennis Ireland this or Tennis Ireland that. But like, in fairness, there's lots of great people involved. There's lots of really passionate people. We all want the same things at the end of the day. And there's lots of skills there. And for me, the biggest issue is we just don't work well together. It's stupid stuff. Like, and we're all kind of almost competing with each other, even though we want to get the same result at the end of the day.
You know, it's interesting you say that about, speaking and, to other coaches and realize all the knowledge that Irish coaches do have. Why do you think it is that all this knowledge is here, but maybe the success doesn't come on the court? Or what do you think is missing, or what do you think is the difference?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, we've been 50 years and probably the rest where this is the thing that everyone's been talking about. Because, like, to be fair to us as a country, I mean, for the vast majority of people who play tennis in Ireland, we do a really good job as a country, and that's not just waffle. I mean, the ITF did a global tennis survey in it was published in 2019, but it was from the figures from a year before that. And like, we came out incredibly well. Now, when I say incredibly well, the stuff they were looking at was things like the number of courts in a country, the number of active players, the number of clubs, the number of coaches. And I mean, in all of those categories, we were like 30th. I think one of them, we were 41st in the world. And like, that's out of 195, I think it was, countries that did that. So like, in all of these categories, we're right up there in the top quarter of the world. You think of things like the leagues that go on. I know the DLTC here in Dublin is certainly over 100 years. The schools competition is certainly over 100 years. Think of Parks Tennis, which is almost unique around the world that we have here. Think of Enjoy Tennis that's going on at the moment, players with intellectual disabilities, visually impaired, etc. Like, there's an incredible amount of really good stuff that's happening here. And all of that good stuff is what affects the vast majority of people who play tennis in this country. So if you're a beginner player, a recreational player, even a tournament player, if you're somebody who wants to get out, play a league match, play a tournament, like, Ireland is a great country to be in. We have lots and lots of stuff. And I know there's probably people listening, screaming at their iPhones at the moment about some disaster they had and a league match cancelled or whatever. But I'm just saying, in general sense, going on the facts and figures, the vast majority of people in this country are really well served. Now, to actually answer your question, the glaring problem is that we have this very small number of people who absolutely deserve attention and deserve support, who are the people who are at the very top of the sport in this country. And year after year after year, in fact, decade after decade, we have yet to find a solution to help them achieve what they want to achieve. And despite all of those great facts and figures, you could also look at that ITF global report and the section in which we were completely invisible, which is the amount of players in Grand Slam main draws. And that is where Ireland appears, or doesn't appear, because I don't think they even put us in, because we're zero. So yeah, now look, to get to the answer, there are dozens and dozens of things, and this is where everybody with their own angle and their own opinion will throw out a different reason. I think, first of all, just the one issue that we need to be slightly realistic about, which none of us are going to solve, there is a resources issue. And I've had great sympathy for people over the last 40 years that I would have known who have tried to make inroads at the performance level, and that's whether they're coaches or parents or players. And we do suffer from a lack of resources. Now, that's not an excuse not to try, but it is a reality that's there. There is a lack of money in tennis in Ireland compared to other countries. So that's just one thing. But for me, that's more something I would mention and then put to the side, because there's no point allowing that as an excuse. I suppose the other thing to put on the table, and then we'll maybe get to some solutions, is that there are a group of people, and this isn't an opinion that I agree with, but I think it's worth putting out here, is that there's a group of people who would say, well, why bother? They would argue, well, hang on a sec, we're all paying affiliation fees, we're paying tournament entry fees. And you know yourself, you enter a tournament and there's the little line of the capitation fee, and you're paying this extra money. And so there's lots of people who would say, well, hang on, we're all paying all this extra money, and some of that is paying for like the National Tennis Centre or the performance players or whatever it might be going to. And is there an argument that why should we bother? Because if we have 100,000 people playing tennis in this country, and what would you say, 100 are at that elite level who are trying to make a living out of it? And that's probably even exaggerating it. So what, I mean, 100 out of 100,000, I'm now sorry I said those numbers because I'm trying to desperately work it out in my head. That's not even 1%. That's you know, a tenth of 1%, I think. So like, you could argue, why are we putting resources towards those players? Could we suggest that they, and by the way, I don't agree with this, but there are people who say, why don't they just fund their own training, head off to academies in Spain, and all of the money in tennis in Ireland should go towards recreational players and clubs? Now, okay, there's people who say that. I would argue that no, we're doing the right thing. I think sport is competitive. I think if we are encouraging people to push themselves, to excel themselves, the natural extension of that is that when people do get to the top of the tree in this country, that we should be there to support them and encourage them and help them progress. Yeah. So then to get to your actual question, which I know you asked about 7 minutes ago now, which is why is that not happening? Okay, so from my point of view, I focus on two things because they're the two things that I feel I can offer something on. And I feel, first of all, coach education is a big role. I don't believe we're ever going to have a top 100 standard player until we have a top 100 standard coach. I think it's the cart before the horse. I think coaches are underserved in this country. The training of coaches is, I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think we have incredible raw materials here in terms of coaches. If you think of almost any coach you have ever encountered, they are young, energetic, active, enthusiastic, motivated. Like, we have an incredible population in this country, even in terms of things like the vast majority of people in this country finish secondary school. A huge proportion of people in this country go on to third level. And you might argue, well, that's got nothing to do with being a tennis coach, but it just signals the fact that people take learning seriously. And therefore, we have a phenomenal raw material in terms of the people in this country. You add into that then the fact that these are people who have decided they want to coach a sport, which by definition means that they are people who want to help others. And I just feel that they're underserved. I feel that the coaching courses have room for improvement, and I'm not having a go at any person. I think the people involved in the coaching courses are often some of the most motivated and people out there, and who want to get the actual best. But I feel the whole package of coaching training isn't as good as it could be. And I mean, we can go back right through the history of it, and I'll summarize it in about 30 seconds. But like, we've gone from system to system to system where, and I could have the order of this slightly wrong, but there was a time for about a decade where we were following the LTA, the British system, and we used all of their materials, and we said, right, let's go. They have all the stuff done. We'll train our coaches the same way. And then there was a movement away from that because the powers that be at the time weren't happy. And we suddenly took on the Canadian coaching system, and we had all the Canadian manuals, and we're like, oh, Canada are great. Let's do that. I think we then moved to the Belgian system. And so now the latest thing is we're moving, as far as I'm aware, to the ITF system. And all that keeps happening is, as far as I can see, that we're doing a system. It happens for a period of time, that sort of runs out of fashion, out of taste, or people just decide it's not working, and we just go to a whole new one. And what's missing from me in this whole equation is this. It's just this fixation on the course, on the materials, which actually, okay, they're a piece of the pie. If you're trying to make the best coach in the world, obviously the content is a piece of the pie, but it's only one piece of it. But it's not. But for me, we're kind of leaving out, as far as I can see, lots of the other pieces. So, for example, we all, let's say most people who I assume are listening to this maybe have done or are doing the Leaving Cert here in Ireland. So we all did the same course, but we all had very different experiences because we were all in different environments. We all had different teachers. We all had different people sitting around us. And so what determined how well we all did wasn't the course, because we all did the same course. What determined how well we did was all of that other stuff. So if you're training to be a coach here in Ireland, for me, in some ways, what the course is just a skeleton to hang everything else on. But it seems to be the one thing that we fixate on all the time. And we seem to think, oh, now we've got this new course, that's going to fix everything. But we still have the same environment and the same people and the same, like, everything else has stayed the same. So I think coach education is hugely important until we have some of the best coaches in the world in this country, which is totally possible, by the way, because we do have some of the best coaches in the world in other sports. So there's no reason why we can't have that in Ireland. I think we're not going to be going anywhere in terms of producing a player. Like, we might get the odd outlier. Maybe something might happen where, and if it does, it'll likely be a player who just themselves goes off to an academy in Spain or Florida and trains there for 4 or 5 years and then breaks into the top 100. And look, wouldn't that be great? I think we'd all love a top 100 player, however it happens. But for it to happen in any sort of sustained way, I think number one on the agenda is coach education.
It just, on that, on coach education, you mentioned obviously the different systems, that like the content being the skeleton. What do you think are the other pieces of the pie that need to be added in? Like, what do you think needs to, or could change, or that would help?
Okay, well, let me say this. If we had a blank piece of paper and we said, right, we want to help develop some of the best tennis coaches in the world, and the question was, on our blank piece of paper, what would you put down? What would those people need to have done to have become some of the best coaches in the world? So I would go through a whole list of things. I would say that those people would need to have traveled with players to tournaments. Those people would need to have had experience of sitting courtside, in a Davis Fed Cup type scenario, working through a match with a player. I think those players would need to have had experience of going together to tournaments and charting matches. I think those people would need to have had kind of opportunities to work with players over a period of time, that this would be part of the course where they would work with a player over a periodization session for 3 months leading up to a tournament, recorded the whole thing, assessed how the thing went, how the whole process went. So I suppose what I'm saying is I feel that there is lots of stuff that you would hope somebody would have done to get them to the point where they're of a high enough standard. And the difficulty is when you look at the traditional courses, even at the moment, even the likes of the new ITF courses, which content, by the way, seems to be very positive, but it's still framed in this thing of, I think the first level is something like 28 hours. So it has like the course, a bit of an outline of it, and it says 28 contact hours. Now, as soon as you put hours on something, you're immediately kind of putting a question mark in there, because let's imagine we had 6 or 7 people who were sick and we said, right, you're all going to hospital and in 5 days you're all going to be discharged. Like, as soon as you put a time frame on it, you're assuming that everybody is going to react the same way. But obviously in a hospital environment, a couple of them will be better 2 days later, a couple of them will still be sick in 5 days. And the same with coaching. If you say 28 hours, we're going to turn you from somebody who has a bit of an interest in tennis to a great coach. Well, like, now it's destined for failure when we have this 28-hour thing, because we'll get to 28 hours and yeah, some of you will be great coaches, but some of you might have been great coaches after 10 hours, whereas others after 28 hours won't be anywhere near being a decent coach. So it's this issue of like sticking to a course, because it's not personalized learning then in any way. What you're doing is you're picking an average, you're pitching a course content at the middle ground at an average, and you're hoping that what comes out at the end is going to be good, but it can't be, because that course is going to be good for some people, not good for others. And the proof of the pudding you can see every week of the year here in Ireland, because we have technically a coach structure where there's different levels, but there isn't really a coach structure, because you can go through all of these levels, but then let's say, for example, the National Tennis Centre needs a coach, which you would imagine is like the top level of coaching in Ireland. Like, quite often, as far as I can see, when there's a vacancy at the National Tennis Centre, that will go to somebody who maybe hasn't gone through all of the levels, maybe somebody who's a recently retired player, and they go straight in and start working there. And I'm not by any means having to go with them, but I'm just saying, what does that say about our belief in the coaching structure then? That if we genuinely believe that we're offering a top quality coaching structure with all of these levels, then would it not be fair to say that somebody who goes through all those levels and comes out at the other end should be the top coaches in the country? And if they're not, then for me, we have to go back and question the courses then and say, well, what's missing? Why isn't it a case that the people who have just finished the top level course, why are they not the ones straight away going into the National Tennis Centre to take the top players in this country? And if somebody can answer that and say, well, it's because they don't know enough of this or they don't know enough of that, well, this and that needs to be in our training courses then. And so therefore we have this kind of scenario where coaches themselves, I think, would say, or some coaches, sorry, I shouldn't be speaking on behalf of other people, but I've certainly had some people, I've had the conversation with them where they might feel demotivated as coaches because they might feel they've done everything that's been asked of them, done all the courses, gone to all the events, but then they feel they're left outside a little bit, and there's a perception of maybe a bit of a closed shop, that every time there's a position, let's say at the tennis centre, or if there's an interprovincial team to be captained, or all these little bits and bobs that go with coaching might very often all often be seen to go to a same small group of people, even though some of those people may not have gone through the system. And by the way, I'd be in total agreement. If I was running the National Tennis Centre and I had a vacancy, I would want the best person, and I wouldn't care necessarily what they had gone through. But that to me paints the picture that then what they have gone through is not good enough, that I would go back then to step one and I'd say, right, I want to create a system so that whoever comes out the end of that process, at the end of this, has all of the attributes that I think we need.
Yeah. Now, in terms of kind of, I guess, summarizing these views on the coach education system, I think you have 3 C's that would look at, I guess, the main points. So we just go through those main points, 3 C's to sum it up.
Yes, and you might need to remind me of this because I think I wrote that a while ago, but I would certainly say collaboration was one of those.
Was it?
Yeah, good. Yeah, this is a little quiz for me here. So yeah, collaboration, because I mean, I think, and now I know I'm going to waffle about this for a few minutes, so you might have to get me back on track after. But I know we're kind of focusing on the performance side of things here because it's the one little chink in Irish tennis that we haven't yet kind of totally cracked. But I just look here. I'm based in Dublin, and certainly within a few miles of where I am, there's at least 4 or 5 clubs that are running some version of a performance squad or an elite squad or whatever, and it's just absolute madness, and not madness for any of them individually. Coaching at the end of the day is a career, and people are making a living out of it, and there's a marketing kind of side to that where some, you know, I think it sounds good to call your squad performance or elite. It might attract certain players, but when we look at it from the big picture, if you're interested in Irish tennis, you would say, hang on a second, folks, we're a small country. We absolutely, if we're ever going to produce world class players, we're not going to do that with everybody competing with each other. And it's complete insanity from the big picture point of view to have 4 or 5 or 6 clubs all within a few miles radius of each other, all pulling players in different directions. And it might work out individually well for some of the coaches there, and more power to them. As I say, it's their job, and it's not my role to be telling them what they should and shouldn't do. But it's a shame that at a performance level that there isn't more collaboration, because we can't produce players unless we have all of those top players, or as many as possible, training together. So yeah, collaboration would be a big one. Go on. You're going to have to remind me, Adam, what I wrote.
Well, just on that, how would you I guess see that improving, see collaboration, more collaboration in that kind of respect that you were mentioning there?
Okay, well, there's 2 ways of approaching that, and there's probably the nicer way, and then there's a bit of a hardball way. So the nicer way is that you would hope that coaches themselves might see some benefit in working together. So let's imagine we have 5 clubs close enough to each other, 5 different coaches, and they're all running their performance program. Now, none of those coaches are making an income just from running a performance program. So they're all running other elements as well, whether it's mini tennis or teenagers or adults or whatever it might be. I mean, there would be a huge logic in terms of player development in certainly the performance players coming together. And that might be, for example, that for a 6-week training block, those performance players from all 5 clubs come to my club and I train them. And in that 6-week block, I'm working on something specific, and I'm working on something that is my strength in coaching. So previously, before this started, I've got together with the 5 other coaches, and maybe I've said, you know what, I'm really good at the fitness side of things or whatever. Maybe another coach really good at the mental side of things, or maybe you break down technique, tactics, whatever it might be. And they're doing their training block with me. 6 weeks later, they're gone to another coach, and we're all working together. Now, bear in mind, the other benefit of them all coming together is in these 6-week blocks, they all now have other people to practice with. So it's not just about the coaching. It's that in that time period, they're playing with each other, practice matches, playing tournaments together, whatever it might be. Now, that shouldn't affect any of the coaches financially, because bear in mind that if I have all of the performance players, that means that some of my tournament players or teenager players or adult players are getting to go to your club, and you're going to take them. So this collaboration doesn't just need to be at the performance level. And in fact, if we do it at other levels, it gives everybody new people to play against, new experiences of where to play, new coaches that they can interact with, and nobody kind of loses out, because we're all still coaching the same amount of people. But the benefit is particularly at the performance level, where you get this extra training with extra people of a higher standard. The other benefit of collaboration is where we go above, another step above, which is where you get somebody then who's either involved in the provincial, so Leinster, Munster, Ulster, Connacht, or Tennis Ireland, who now is able to communicate and say, right, can we have a unified approach? Can we have it so that all of our players are doing X, Y, and Z? And can we have them all doing it in this order? Can we have them all prepared for this tournament that's coming up? Because at the moment, everybody is just doing different stuff. And every coach, and I shouldn't say everybody, because I don't know what everybody is doing, but lots of people are doing lots of different things. And that can't be good for the bigger picture. It can't be good that there are 10 kind of performance players, if you want to call them that, in one club doing totally different things to 10 in another. And yet, if we're picking a Munster team, a Leinster team, an Ireland team, they're going to come from all of these places. So I can't think of any other sport where that would happen, that we're so disparate and split up and all just doing our own thing, but yet we all then need to come together at some point to try and achieve a common goal, and it's just not doable. So the positive way of achieving this is the hope that coaches might come together. It might involve cooperation from clubs to allow other people coming into their club, etc. So that's the nice way. The hardball way, which maybe, I don't know, would people want to go down this route, but do bear in mind the Tennis Ireland are the governing body, and as the governing body, they have some advantages. So, for example, if we have an international tournament here in Ireland, an ITF event or something like that, Tennis Ireland have wild cards slots available to give. Tennis Ireland can select players to represent Ireland. Now, you could take the hardball view. So let me give you the parallel of the likes of rugby. So anybody who's any interest in rugby might know that the decision was made, look, if you sign for an English club or a French club or something like that, if you leave Ireland to play for your club, that's it, your Ireland days are over. You're not going to play. And that took a few years of hardball from Irish rugby, and a few years where some good players were gone. People might remember Johnny Sexton went to France, etc. But the message got out, and the end result was, right, if you want to play for Ireland, you join in with the Irish system. So let's do a parallel with that with tennis in Ireland. That the difficulty at the moment is, I could, if I'm a top junior, I could decide to snub Tennis Ireland completely and say, I'm going to go to my own private coach. I'm not going to get involved in any of your stuff, Tennis Ireland. But yet, you might still pick me to play for Ireland if you're Tennis Ireland. You might still give me a wild card. So the hardball approach for me, which isn't necessarily positive or great, but it is an option, would be for Tennis Ireland to say, well, we have our system and we think we have confidence and faith in our system and it's well developed and we want you to play with us. And if you're going to choose to go to your own private coach, that's fine. We can't stop you doing that. But you won't be getting wild cards into tournaments. We won't be selecting you for Ireland. There are, I suppose, there are carrots and sticks there that a governing body has available to them in their armory, and that could take a few years of being sort of, of tension and stuff like that, or picking a national team where you're leaving out somebody who's actually good enough. But is the argument that it might only take a year or two of that before people say, okay, we need to stick with the national system. Now, the big caveat of that is that the national system then has to be very good. And I think that's the kind of part of the difficulty at the moment, that there are players who are picked to be part of the national squad and all that who just choose not to join it. And unfortunately, that says something. It says that they don't value their participation in that. Now, I should say that's not necessarily always due to the program itself. Often, I presume it's the location. I certainly know a few people who might have been chosen and just to get to DCU was just a nightmare. And they're like, here, I just can't do this. So it wasn't really a reflection on the program. It was a reflection of where it is. But I don't know. I think we have to have some element of collaboration. We've got to have some element of unity together, because we're too small a country and we're not if our goal is to get players into the top 100, it's not going to happen the way we're going at the moment.
Yeah. All right, collaborate. So after you had community, it was your next C.
Oh yeah, and that, I suppose the reason, sorry, that had left my mind was more because that's probably at the level down below what we're talking about here, where like a big part of this is just building this pyramid of having a huge base of players below, and the logic, of course, is that the bigger the base you have at the bottom, then the more players are likely to progress up to the performance level. And we definitely do seem to have a problem, particularly the kind of teenage kind of years of leakage of players just kind of leaving the sport and going to other things. And that sea of community I was talking about was just that almost thankless job where you're really relying on those incredible volunteers and committee members in clubs all across this country to just keep going and keep giving any opportunities for people to keep playing this sport, because just the epidemic that we have at that level is coaching is players whose parents sign them up for a coaching once a week, and that's the only tennis they play. And at the end of the day, like, coaching isn't tennis. Like, we need people to play tennis more, and it's great to go to your coaching once a week, but if you're going to coaching once a week, you'd hope you'd be playing at least once a week as well. But lots of players at that age would report that there isn't really a chance for them to play. There isn't, because they're playing other sports in their school. They get back to their club, it's dark, it's week, the evenings they're not allowed to play in the club, or you can't play after 7:00. And that kind of sea of community that you're talking about is just that idea of being credible of clubs, schools, any organizations that have young people there, can make any opportunities for people to play. And it seems like almost a kind of a stupid thing to be asking when you look at the facts and figures we talked about at the start of all the incredible stuff that is going on. Whether it's, like I say, I mean, some of the oldest tennis competitions in the world are our schools competitions and the Dublin leagues and Parks tennis, all these amazing things. But the more we can do, the better, because the more we can have people playing this sport, it's not only a case of funneling then a few of those to the performance level, but you got to fast forward then to 10 or 15 years, because if we can keep somebody playing the sport who's 15 or 16, when you fast forward 10 or 15 years, they are the people who are going to be the committee in their club and getting their kids involved in tennis. And so sometimes I think we can get focused overly on the performance side, but massively important that we maintain the brilliant stuff that we're doing with the community tennis.
Yeah, so it's really looking at grassroots, just participation of having as many people playing as possible is what you're looking at with community.
Absolutely, yeah, totally.
And then the final one, then, commitments.
Yeah, I think I kind of half mentioned this when I was talking about this idea of, like, in the coach ed, for example, that like we have this these kind of coaching courses and stuff, but like we don't seem to really believe in them, in the sense of, as we were saying, when somebody comes out the other end and then we don't actually recognize them as being a top coach. But you could do that across the board with lots of stuff. I think commitment for me also involves stuff like that. When you think of our top juniors, for example, and look, they've got to put a huge amount into this, but there's very clearly different levels of commitment from our players. And I'm talking people who might be now involved in the National Tennis Centre and stuff, and the top 15, 16-year-olds. And you can see some, for example, who've taken a year off school, and there's certainly been a few who've done that in the last few years. And like, that's a serious level of commitment there. And whereas others on the other side of the coin are still playing high level other sports when they're 16, 17, and also playing tennis. So you're half thinking, hang on, like we've such a limited amount of resources that we can offer in terms of money, in terms of coaches, that for me, we need to make the commitment to the people who are going to do likewise. And I think that's a very difficult thing, because it might involve a player who's been in a national system for 3 or 4 years saying, look, good luck, we need to part ways here. But we are so limited in what we can offer. And I feel sometimes we're spreading ourselves very thin. And it looks like resources are being given to players who don't seem to meet that standard for me. And maybe that's just a judgment, but I've certainly a couple of times, what would stand out in my mind is watching junior fits, for example. And I've an incredibly clear memory about 2 years ago of seeing one player, and like the level of effort they were putting in was -0. They were literally just tanking the match in a strop. And it just infuriated me to think of the hours and the time and the resources that I knew had been put into that player. Look, maybe that player was just having a bad day, but I think we are so limited that we need to be very specific about what we're committing and who we're committing to.
Yeah, and that actually moves on kind of nicely just to a couple of other points on Irish tennis from kind of an article that you wrote a few years ago about things I guess you'd like to see in Irish tennis. And one, yeah, obviously you talked a lot about coaching, coach education, which I guess we've touched on. Another point was that idea of junior fits, William, the junior championships, and what could maybe be done a little bit differently with that. Would you mind just touching a little bit on that?
Yeah, and I think to be fair, there are moves to make some changes here, but I mean, I'll just tell you some of the stuff that infuriates me. I'm going a rant here now, but I would rock in, because my 9-to-5 job, as I say, is I'm a school teacher and I work a bit in a university. So over the summer, I'm kind of pretty free, and I would rock into junior fits and watch some of the people that I teach in school playing. So simple things like I would be watching a match, 2 players go onto a court. They seem to have been told that they can have a 3-minute knock-up, maybe 4. They have some of the helpers shouting at them up from, well, sorry, that's making it sound like they're being aggressive, but certainly, talking down to them from up on the viewing areas, telling them, you need to get started. Now, I just feel as the national championships, it's unacceptable to rush players through a match like that. I think it's unacceptable to have players playing a match. I think is 7 a.m. an exaggeration. There were certainly matches at 7:30. I think that's totally unacceptable for national championships. I think it's completely unacceptable to have players standing around being told that they're playing at 1 o'clock and matches not going on until 5, 6 o'clock. And this, I know if you raise this point, sometimes the answer will be, sure, look, they're used to it and blah, blah, blah. But I think what I often come back to is not the player who's going to win junior fits. What I'm often focusing on is the player who will get one match in junior fits, who's played all summer, maybe isn't that talented or hasn't had the time or whatever. And this is their World Cup to be in there. And they're dressed up and the family has come to watch them. And it's just unacceptable the way some people have been treated. And I'm, I feel myself getting angry even talking about it, how strongly I feel about that. Now, I know sometimes people will say, there's lots of entries and this, that, and the other. But like, there's solutions to this. There's easy ways to solve this, which is you run this event in different clubs or you have less events in it. I mean, there's multiple different ways. What it all boils down to is there's too many matches in too short period of time in one location on too few courts. So it's just a maths problem. I mean, it's easily resolved, but people need to be treated fairly, which is that if we're trying to say that this is the pinnacle of junior tennis and therefore you should be getting up and you should be stretching and you should prepare, you can't be playing a match that early in the morning. You can't be rushing through a 3 or 4 minute knock-up. You can't be standing around for hours on end because the matches were scheduled for 1 hour gaps when everybody who's ever played the sport knows that that's not long enough. And here we are in the biggest tournament of the year, and it seems like we're ignoring the fact that matches don't last an hour. So I just feel that tournament is absolutely crying out for some changes. And I know lots of people who've won various events and that over the last few years, and look, they've had a great week and that's fantastic. But the vast majority of people who play in every tournament, as we know, lose at some point. And it's hugely disappointing that those people leave sometimes with a sour taste in their mouth, not just because they lost, but because they feel they were treated badly.
Yeah. And just to tie that into another point, which is kind of the idea of selling our sport, which is another point that you mentioned, I guess, is that something you tie in with that tournament in particular, being the pinnacle of the junior calendar, of selling, of maybe making a bit more of a deal around the sport, around the tournament as well?
Yeah, I think promoting the sport is a slightly trickier one because it's definitely one that's somewhat out of our hands, in that you would hope at some point that some level of, I mean, it certainly used to happen. It was a case certainly that the Irish Times, Irish Independent, every day of junior fits would be producing results and a little paragraph. And I don't think that still happens. I think maybe it does on finals day or whatever. But what's in our hands certainly is things like social media and stuff where everybody involved has an opportunity to promote the tournament that's there. So yeah, I definitely think in any way it should be promoted. I think individual clubs should make more of the fact that their players are playing in the event. There's certainly 1 or 2 clubs I can think of who would be very good at that. And that when one of their players might get to a semi-final or a final, you'd often see 7 or 8 club members coming in to watch. And I think that's a really good sign of a club. So I think individually, yeah, we should all be trying to promote this as much as possible. But I think at the same time, there's a bit of an acceptance that tennis isn't a sport that gets much attention. And I know certainly where I work, we joke about playing schools tennis finals, and you'd be lucky if one man and a dog turns up. I mean, we'd get a few parents and that'd be about the extent of it. And you're standing there raising a cup, biggest achievement of the year, and there's a ripple of applause from the 3 people kind of in front of you. So it is hugely disappointing that our sport doesn't get much attention, or that people aren't generally aware of it. And like, yeah, anything we could do, I think, to promote it, would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, no, I know it's a hard question, but you say that about selling the sport. Are there any points or any kind of ideas you'd have of how we could do that better?
Yeah, well, I kind of think we probably don't harness the likes of social media very well. I don't think we harness clubs and schools enough because, like I say, I would feel that it would be great to be telling clubs, okay, you have 7 players in junior fits. Can you circulate all of your members and tell them when your club members are playing? And you'd hope then that 10, 15, 20 people might come from the club to watch their club member. You could be circulating schools the same way, going, do you know you have 6 players in the Irish Junior Championships start next week? Here's the times of their first matches. Will you circulate that to all of your school members? So, for example, if you think of a club that might have 700, 800 members, if all of them get a message saying on Saturday at 2:00, Johnny, Mary, whatever is playing the Irish Junior Championships, it's free admission, come on in. Like, because I suspect a lot of your average tennis players might be slightly intimidated. They think, well, am I allowed to go into Fitzwilliam? Are you allowed to just walk in there? And if every club was telling every member about when their fellow members are playing, if every school was telling all their pupils when, like, you just think if you spread that message out to those tens of thousands of people, surely we would have an extra 100 people in there. And like an extra 100 people is pretty much doubling the amount of the crowd on a given day. So just simple things like that for me, which I don't think are being done and certainly don't appear to being done, would be very straightforward. But it does tie into some of the points I was making. You can't say that Aoife will be playing at 2:00 on Saturday, attract loads of her club in, and then she doesn't get on the court till 7:00. I mean, that's what I'm saying about being unacceptable. We need some kind of element of tying the organization in with the promotion, because otherwise it falls flat in its face.
Yeah. And just another point on Irish tennis is another point you had in that was to make tournaments more meaningful. And I think you're particularly talking, I guess, not as specifically about junior tournaments, maybe senior tournaments and getting elite players. So just, would you mind just, I guess, explaining a bit about what you were talking about there?
Yeah, I'm loving this, by the way. It's just random things that annoy me, and I love you just teeing me up to have a go at it. But I just feel that you go through the summer and you can go to, and you're right, I'm probably talking senior tournaments here and some of the bigger ones. And I basically feel like I've never seen any of the best players in Ireland playing in them. Maybe never is the wrong word. It's rarely, I think, would probably be a better way of putting it. And I do accept, like, the players are very busy, and the best players in the country deserve full support. Of course they do. Like, they're traveling to the back beyonds, like in very tough conditions in foreign countries and on their own. And like, that's a whole other area that we need to support them. But I do think for the development of the sport, the people who are the best players in the country, who are being picked on Davis Cup, Fed Cup, kind of should be appearing in tournaments, because even from that trickle down effect that you can see in any aspect of life, that those best players need to be playing tournaments so that the players below them get to play against them. And then that drags everybody up standard. Whereas we're not doing ourselves a service if we don't have that happening. And I know it's easy, because I suppose everything I'm talking about, all of these ideas and stuff, it's really all looking at the big picture. And you could pick an individual player and say, oh, well, she's traveling here, there, everywhere, and she's tired when she comes home, or she's doing whatever. And so on an individual level, you can see how there's a logical argument for that player not to play in the Open in whatever club it might be. But we've got to look at the big picture and say, right, we need some way of encouraging that or facilitating that to happen, because we want the best players in tournaments, so that, like we say, that the level below that get a chance to play them, so that people can turn up and get enthused about tennis in Ireland and go, oh, there's that person that I'm seeing on social media who was playing last week in Turkey or whatever. Like, they've got to be playing. So to get them playing, we've got to create some kind of system which enables that to happen. And whether that's, again, the softball or the hardball, depends which kind of way you want to go. And we either try and facilitate by helping that player arrange a calendar or their schedule around it so that they'll be available for the week. Do we do some system where we say, right, there's 8 tournaments in the year, and we pick 8 tournaments, and we say we expect every one of you people to play at least 2 of them, or at least 3 of them. And if you don't play that number, you are not eligible for selection for Davis Cup or Fed Cup. Like, do we involve some kind of level of kind of situation like that? So, like, there's different approaches of making this happen, but I just think it needs to happen, because it's hugely disappointing, I think, when you think of any Open tournament, and anyone who's been involved in running an Open tournament, junior or senior, it's a mountain of work. Like, it's a really tough scenario. And everybody who does this, who goes to the bother getting sponsorship, who gives up their club for a week, gets all the volunteers in the club to help, I think we deserve to have the best possible players we can there. And nobody is asking for players to be playing these week in, week out. But I think it would be reasonable to expect that our top players are playing 2 or 3 tournaments. And some are, by the way. This isn't a blanket. I know some do, but the more, the better.
Yeah. And just, I guess, on that as well, the one time that I have experienced that is in the Interpros last summer, when, they have Leinster, Connacht, whatever. And I think that is the time when those top players do play. And I guess if we could get that kind of situation a little bit more, we'd be doing well.
That's right. And I totally agree with you. And the only slight disappointment with that is, don't forget that playing the Interpros, albeit being great, it's a slightly cocooned event in that it's all everyone together in sort of one venue. And you could argue it's not hugely public. And part of it for me would be, I'd love that idea of random club member can turn up, little, junior, senior, whatever club member, and see the best people in their club playing a tournament.
Yeah.
And I think the Interpros, while being a great event, there is a big social element to that as well. And there's an argument that it's something that lots of players enjoy, and rightly so, and great that they're playing. But I think I'd love to see them in a regular club open tournament as well, for everyone else to be able to watch them play.
Yeah, no, for sure. Now, just before we move on to a final couple of questions, are there any kind of summarizing words, any final words you'd like to make on Irish tennis?
My God, that's a tough one now, and a dangerous one, because I might go here for about 40 minutes. I think, well, I suppose I'll end up repeating myself, because I suppose that's the nature of a summary, is that I think it's hugely important, first of all, that we are positive about the situation. And I definitely am not on that scenario of people kind of just having a go all the time and sort of expecting that somebody else is going to solve all our problems. Because I think anyone who, and I have no kind of, I don't work for Tennis Ireland or have any kind of connection there whatsoever. So I'm only saying it out of some slight knowledge of what goes on, which is that there's people working incredibly hard to try and achieve an awful lot with very limited resources. So I think, first of all, we absolutely should be patting ourselves on the back for lots of the incredible stuff that goes on in this country in tennis. And I think we have to come to the kind of hopefully conclusion that if we want to tick that final box off, that box of also producing some performance players, this involves us all doing our part. And there is kind of too much at the moment of people who want that top thing to happen, just constantly giving out about other people, and we're not going to get anywhere. And of course, it needs some leadership, and it will need some work from Tennis Ireland, but it needs sacrifices from other people as well. And that idea of us all working together, pooling resources, bringing anything we can to it, is our only hope, because we're too small for any of us to do this on our own.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before I let you go, David, just obviously you've traveled a good bit to these conferences and presenting. If I asked for the best place you've been, or a best somewhat tennis related trip, would anything spring to mind?
Actually, the last one I went on was brilliant. I was in Thailand last October. That was the World Coaches Conference. When I say last October, that was obviously October 2019. So that really stood out because it was a really good event, really well run. So the World Coaches Conference is the ITF run that. It's and it could literally be anywhere. And that was a really good event. Good people at it, good speakers. But like I'd kind of mentioned at the start, huge benefit of like the chats with other people around. I think it probably also stands out because it was the last chance to do anything, and it was only shortly after that the whole world shut down. But no, really nice people, great country. I had never been there before. I was presenting at it, and actually my presentation was a bit disastrous, which I'll explain in a minute if you want. But the conference stuff, yeah, really, really good. And just as I say, I think that the big thing a lot of the time is that you get to just chat to some of these incredible people who have achieved great things. And then you might hear 3 months later, or you watch French Open or something on TV, and you see them sitting then in the coach's box, and you're like, oh, wow, okay. Or even on a lower level, I remember sitting at that conference through a presentation about the Swiss tennis system, and they were just explaining how they keep teenagers involved in tennis. So like pretty simple thing, but they just had some great ideas, and the person presenting was really good. And sometimes you can look at things like that and go, geez, we could just be doing all of this stuff in Ireland. If we all just got together and, a bit of cooperation, we could achieve this.
Yeah. Now you mentioned, you hinted at a little story about your own
sorry.
presentation.
Yeah, no, not a great story. Basically, cut a long story short, I was presenting at it, and traditionally you have a big screen behind you with your presentation on it, and you have your laptop in front of you. So this is like the world conference. I was like, right, I need to make a decent effort. So I planned it, prepared it, practiced it. I was full on ready to go. turned up to basically find out that there wasn't a way of having your laptop in front of you. So you just had to rely on what was behind you on the kind of big screen. But the problem was the microphone was in a fixed position in front of you. So if you can imagine, I was trying to make a presentation where I'm facing forwards, but my whole presentation is directly behind me and a couple of hundred people in front of me. And at the start, I thought, right, I'll just keep turning around every time the slide changes, and then I'll turn back to the microphone. Anyway, I just decided after 2 minutes that was just mental, and I just looked like a crazy person having to constantly turn around. And it was a bit of a disaster how they had set it up. And I just said, right, let's just go for it. And I just ended up waffling for 40 minutes. Now, that mightn't totally surprise you, because every time you've asked me a question, I've spoken, I've just rabbited on. But it was incredibly stressful. And it just was a real lesson for me in terms of like preparation, that you kind of, whether you're coaching on a court, whether you're standing up, whether you're playing a match, that old classic thing of you prepare for the worst. You just, and that was a massive learning for me that got through it. And I'd say the people in the audience didn't realize anything had gone wrong, but just absolutely that thing of just always assuming that whatever the worst could happen is going to happen, and being ready to kind of go for it. And I kind of got my way out of that, but I'll be more ready the next time.
Yes, yeah. And just finally then, what's your favorite thing about tennis?
I do love the fact that people who play tennis are on their own. I love that idea of, and as I say, I work in school and I've lots of friends involved in other sports, and I can definitely see the huge benefit of team sports. There is no doubt there's huge benefits to those, but there's something incredible about a player being on a tennis court on their own, solving their own problems and just having to survive. And the fact that tennis doesn't have a final whistle, that kind of idea that you're there until it ends, and that so the match is never totally lost, never totally won. And over the years, look, any of us involved in tennis have seen crazy upsets and comebacks and all the rest of it. And just as somebody who works with young people and is involved in school, it's a phenomenal learning kind of situation for me to put someone on a tennis court and for them to have to stand on their own 2 feet and maybe argue with an opponent or deal with stress or whatever it might be. So I think tennis is a brilliant kind of replica of life in many. I know that's going very philosophical on it, but just that thing of being on your own and standing up for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good. David, I think we'll leave it there, taking up enough of your time this evening. I really appreciate the chance to talk and get your thoughts on various topics. And I think I hope people find it as interesting as I did. Just, yeah.
No worries at all, Adam. Yeah, actually delighted to chat. And Kamir, thanks a million for all you're doing, because I know lots and lots of people, and I've spoken about it with others who have been listening in, and lots of people you've already spoken to are kind of friends and stuff, and everyone's saying great things. So fair play to you for doing it.
Appreciate that, and thanks for talking again.
Big thanks once again to David for his time. I found that to be a really thought-provoking chat, and it really made me think about how things are done and how things could maybe be done differently. Please feel free to reach out to David. You can check out his website at dwireland.com and send him an email there, or to reach out or to send me an email, irishtennisupdates@gmail.com, if any thoughts came out of this episode that you'd like to share. If you did enjoy this episode, I would ask that you would share it, like it, leave a comment or review. It really does help to spread the word and get the podcast out there. So thank you in advance for that. And on that note, that is all. I hope you guys are doing okay. And until the next time, I've been Adam, and goodbye.